Again, everyone, thank you for attending this session of Webinar Wednesday. Today we're going to look at the advanced techniques for map caching. The first thing I'd like to do is do a little bit of a review of what we had discussed previously in a previous webinar about creating cache maps. So I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on the steps from that webinar and all the detail of creating a cache map, because I do want to review it so we kind of get on the same on the right page. So first off, I just want to revisit what a cache map is. As it says in general terms, it's a copy of a stored image for retrieval. Basically, a copy of an image that you can retrieve. That's what a cache map is. These cache maps that we're dealing with are specific to GeoSync Go. We basically capture an image tile. Those tiles are organized by level, by view level, or zoom level. They provide a mosaic image when they're utilized together as they're organized, and they are actually stored locally, or they can be on your local hard drive, or they can be stored in your cloud account or access through the internet. Why do we need cache maps? The default background imagery in GeoSync Go consists of, we're drawing that from online image services. So the street map, the satellite, the custom, those are all online sources. So there may be times that we would like to, for a faster map display, in case my internet connection is slow or a little weak, I could cache a map and have it locally. That way it runs faster. We may also want to utilize the mapping disconnected. We may want to go in the field with a tablet or with GeoSync Go desktop, but be disconnected from the internet. So we would need a local copy of that background map. We also might want to customize our background map, which we'll see. An example I have here, we'll see that. We may also want a detailed static map. You may not want to do for the GeoSync Go layers. You may just want to actually publish out just a subject area very easily. Just take a subject area that you have mapped in, say, ArcGIS, push that out for viewing just as a background layer. The cache maps can be used in all of our GeoSync Go applications: GeoSync Go Mobile, GeoSync Go Desktop, and on the web map. They can be stored locally, as mentioned earlier, on a local hard drive, or published to your cloud account, and in case you just want a detailed map for your web map site, your GeoSync Go web map, we can publish it to the cloud and access it from there. The tools that we have available to create and manage the cache maps, one is GeoSync Go Desktop. In Desktop, we can actually publish tiles from there, standard from the background mapping that is already available, street map, satellite, or the custom. We can cache tiles from those sources. We can also create, if we're doing a custom cache from ArcGIS Desktop, we will use GeoSync Desktop to create a grid that it will use to do that. We'll see that as we go through. The GeoSync Go Tile Builder is basically, it's an ArcGIS Desktop application where we can build your cache files from an existing MXD that you have. So if the MXD, the map view that you have in ArcGIS Desktop, GeoSync Go Tile Builder can open that MXD and produce a cache map of that map view, or those map views. So next, we'll actually start looking into some of the techniques. And really the objective of these more advanced cache techniques are to basically reduce the size of your map package, your resulting map package that you create, because these, and also make it a lot easier to update your cache in the future when you want to update that. These the cache packages can get very large depending on how deep you go in your zoom level. If from level, say, 12 to 14, you have bigger files. You have larger areas. It covers those levels cover larger areas. The deeper you get, so if you go down to 20, level 20, it takes a lot more tiles to cover that area than it does, say, at 12. So not only do you have a lot higher number of tiles the deeper you go, depending on what you're capturing, each individual file size could be larger as well. And that really has to do with color. If you're particularly with aerial imagery, you have so many different colors that it has to process. The file just gets larger. So, first thing, like I say, the first thing to do is you want to plan the process that you're going to use and document it, because getting into these advanced techniques, your process can get very complex. It could have several steps. It will end up saving you time and space, but your steps will increase in implementing these additional techniques. So the first, maybe the most simple technique is to utilize both applications. We may want to utilize ArcGIS Desktop to create the first, say, from levels 10 through 14. May just use the street maps as just a reference of where I am on my map project. Just a very general reference. And typically, me personally, I like to start getting into the detail and the aerial imagery about level 15. It just seems to make sense there, 15 and below. So a lot of times I'll just use the street view, create a very quick, very easily create a quick cache for levels, usually 12 through, or 10 or 12 through 14. Then I'll move over to GeoSync Go Tile Builder and access my ArcGIS desktop project for the more detailed and more customized from level 15 down through, say, 20. Utilizing Tile Builder, as you'll see as we go through this, will also, it gives you it gives you more control of your map. Of course, the content that you can customize the content, but it also gives you more control of the tiles themselves, in that you can buffer these tiles, or you can build buffers and reduce the size or the coverage of where it builds tiles. Using filter boundaries, as I mentioned, basically when I mentioned the buffers, the filter boundaries, what this will do is, instead of creating a tiles for an entire area, we can actually buffer, for instance, a water line, and only have a corridor. Limit the tiles that it builds to a particular corridor. You don't necessarily have to have a large polygon area. You can narrow that down with these. Now, there is a bit of a restriction when talking about filter boundaries. In GeoSync Go Desktop, you can only have a simple polygon. No islands, or it has to be a very simple, just a basic simple polygon. Now, in Tile Builder, since we're utilizing our ArcGIS Desktop project, it can use complex polygons. So there can be islands and gaps and what have you. Typical buffer sources, probably the most used, are road center lines and utility lines. The idea is you want to select a feature. Typically, it's a line feature. It could be point or polygon. Polygon, you've already got your area, but you want to be able to define a corridor for the subject that you're working, for your primary subject. Say if I'm working on a utility map and I'm focusing on my water lines, I want to use my water lines as my buffer. That way, I create background mapping under the water lines, or for the water lines. And the other areas I don't really care about, because I'm focusing on water lines. The typical standard buffer widths by zoom level, for zoom level 18, you'll probably want to do about 1,000-foot buffer, which would mean on each side of the line, you would buffer 1,000 feet, so your total width would be 2,000 feet. In very dense areas, which is what we're going to look at here in MapSync Village, if you're in a dense area in town, it doesn't make much sense to buffer at level 18 because you're just it covers the entire area. You really don't want to buffer that far unless you're out in more of a rural, more open area that, of course, not as dense. Level 19 would buffer 500 feet for a total width of the quarter of 1,000. Level 20, 250. Level 21, which that's probably the extent that you'll want to create a cache map for. That gets really, really huge. And of course, the buffer there would be 150 feet for a total of 300 feet. These should cover the area, your subject area very well. You may want to go a little wider than that. I wouldn't go any more narrow than those. Now, creating the detailed filter boundaries. Do we want to digitize these? No thanks. That'd be a lot of work. And I'll show you why. Better example of what I'm talking about. This the view on the right is the area, the MapSync Village area, and I have buffered the water lines. I buffered my water lines. And this is a level 20 buffer. So to digitize all that, in this case, it wouldn't be too bad because it's not that big of an area. When you're talking about a whole county of water lines or roads, that would take forever to digitize those. The way I created these, I actually created a new layer called GeoSyncGO Buffer 20 for my level 20 buffer or tile bound. Excuse me. Sorry, for filter boundaries. Then I selected the water lines, just a selection of the water lines, and created and buffered those water lines, saved the buffer to GeoSyncGO Buffer 20. Then I merged those so it made one feature. And I typically like to generalize that after the fact. It just makes it easier to process because sometimes these buffers can have just an enormous amount of vertices and be very, very large. So, and typically on the generalization, I will use about a factor of 10% of the zoom level width. So this level 20, I generalized it by 25. Now, we have our buffer. So it's going through the process in GeoSyncGO Tile Builder. The first thing you want to do is actually, on a large data set, it's kind of a trick here, you'll want to reduce the grid before you actually process the tiles. So again, back to the first here. Excuse me. The first class. The first thing we have to do is build. We're going to cache our map from GeoSync or from ArcGIS. So the first thing we have to have is a grid. We do that from GeoSyncGO desktop, and it's a very simple process. You can actually just window your area, go to the tools, build map grids, and let's say we're going to do this for level 20. Now, we can see here, in this case, it would be 809. This is a small area, but it'd be 899 tiles. Oops, sorry, first shift. You will want to select your cache folder. So I would build the initial grid for my level 20. I'm not going to run that again because I've already got it done. So you have a grid of this grid covering this entire area. Now, what we want to end up with is, and again, on a large area, this will make a huge difference. We will end up with the grid being limited to this buffer area that we've created. So way we do that, the first time, of course, with Tile Builder, as we learned in the last class, I'll open my MXD that I want to create the cache from. Take a second to get it open here. And in this case, look at your map and the layers that are on. I do not want to cache the view of the buffer. Now, again, this first run, what you can do, I typically turn off all of the layers. And I'll select my folder name and my buffered layer. I also want to select my actual buffer layer, assign it to level 20, and we went over this in the other class, if you need a refresher on in the other webinar. So then I'll run this. Now the reason I turn this off for the first, I turn everything off for the first run of the cache is white space or blank space caches very quickly and takes up very little space. So the reason I did it the first time is after I run this with this setting on, using the filter boundary, it will actually create, after it finishes, it will create a new, oops, sorry, wrong page. It will create a new file under your documents, GeoSync Go, cache. In this case, we're in MapSync Village. You'll notice it creates a new grid file. In this case, it was 20 grid.csv. The thing there, excuse me, .last. The thing you want to do after you run this is delete the initial file and then copy the last file and rename it for the original, or you can just rename this last file. So at that point, your original grid file was the entire area. After you run it one time, it reduces that grid to your buffer. So that's for this last grid. There's a lot fewer. It's going to take a lot fewer tiles than the original. So, like I said, so kind of recoup here. Once you run it the first time, I run it first just with white space, just blank space, so it runs quickly. After that's finished, I come back. I'll delete this initial 20 grid.csv and rename, copy, and/or rename this 20 grid.csv.last to 20 grid.csv. That way, the next time you run it, the cache will only process the grid that's inside of your buffer. So we've gotten rid of all the other grids that it would have to process. They have to go through. This makes it on those, and you really don't need that until you get like the level, depending on the size of your area, 18, 19, 20. I mean, that's probably only play. And actually the only time you need it is when that's useful is when you have a buffer. Okay. Now, sorry, we'll repeat there. Didn't realize that. All right. Now a little review. Back to the initial class. From GeoSync, this time we're really just looking at GeoSync. At this point, I'm focusing on my level 15 through 20. So at this point, I would go to GeoSync Go Tile Builder for that. And the first thing I would do would be to identify an area that I want to cache. In GeoSync Go Desktop, I would go to the map tools, maybe use filter shapes just to narrow the area down a little bit. Define the specific area that I want to cache. Select the area, including the filter boundary. Again, you go back to the initial one to get all the detail, the previous building GeoSync Go cache maps. So the next step, I would build my map grid, which we just talked about, and this will be the initial grid, where we cover the whole area, not so I'm talking about the entire area here. That's this reduced grid would happen after we get into the tile builder itself. So basically go to GeoSync Go, build our base grid, then we come back to actually build the tiles. We use Tile Builder, open up our MXD. We'll of course select the cache folder name so it writes right in the correct place. We'll also want to select the level that we want to build. So we would want to select the levels that we want to build, apply any buffers, and then basically go, just let it run. So what we've added into this, in this case, are in particular is the grid that we have here, or the tiles that we're creating in Tile Builder. We've created the buffer, a more detailed, complex buffer. We don't want to get into that just yet. Excuse me. Okay, let's look at the map that we created. So if you remember, custom maps, street, and site are all online and they're generic. At this point, I have a local map that I've created. Now, if I'm zoomed out, you can see where I had mentioned before, I just used the street view for my higher zooms. I think I went. So there's 11, 12. Now, when I get to 15, again, that's just where I normally turn on my cache map. These are custom map views that were created in ArcGIS. If you notice, turn this off. I'll show you an ARC. This is an example. So there's roughly level 15. So if you know my background, that looks like the map I have in ARC. A little closer. Okay. Now, the thing we'll look a little closer as I zoom in. Let me find a little detail. Now, I've still got pretty much a full coverage. Same there. Now, when I get into, I'm going to maximize this. When I get into level 19, you'll notice with me, 19 is buffered. So if I get too far away from the water lines, I no longer have a background. And my water lines are cached as well. Now, another thing to think about, at level 19 I have now, if I go any closer, that image is really going to break up pretty bad. So another thing I've done, when I went to 20, I not only buffered it, I turned the imagery off. But this coming from ARC, I still have my features cached. So I basically have what I would consider a wireframe map. It is buffered, so it's smaller, lines and text. We have no background imagery. That also, at that level, like I say, the imagery in this case pretty much breaks up anyway, so why take up space? The clear space or white space is a lot smaller and a lot faster. And we still have enough on the map to have a reference on where we are in our world. Okay. Now, in replacing, one other thing that's not on here that I wanted to, sorry, one thing I want to show you too, didn't have it in the list, but is very helpful when you're dealing with these buffers. I am in ARC here. If I wanted to see, I'm going to turn off the imagery here. If I want to see my buffered grid that I have created with GeoSync Go that I'll use to create the tiles, I can actually add that data. So if I go to my documents, GeoSync Go, cache, MapSync Village, and select my grid file, the CSVs in your main cache layer, those are the grids. That's the grid file. So if I, oops, apologies, I clicked it the wrong time. Okay, I had this set. Take a minute to get back. GeoSync Go, cache, MapSync Village. Here's level 20. That's the corrected grid that the reduced grid I made. I had that. Give you some art training here as well. Once that is in, actually, I've already added 19 as well. So once it's there, you just go to display X and Y data. We'll do longitude and latitude as our X and Y field. We do have to set a projection. The default projection for this project is Kentucky single zone. However, everything that comes out of GeoSync Go is WGS84. So I do have to go back and change that projection for this layer. So we'll go geographic, past it, world, WGS84. But once I have that, it'll tell you a little error, but a little notice about you can't really do anything with this because it doesn't have an object ID field. So that's fine. We just want to view it. So there are basically points for the center of each tile that we've created. Again, it's not the actual grid, but gives you an idea of what your coverage should be for your tiles. Again, these are actually grids. What you're looking at here, it shows a point for the center of each of those tiles. So it'll give you an idea, just a visual of where your grids or where your tiles will be created. Not a lot of detail, but just a good picture. So back to the there. Okay, so now, as I mentioned earlier, you do definitely want to document all the pieces and the steps that you're doing, because you'll want to come back at some point and update your cache, typically. I mean, depending on what you have in it, maybe more often than not, but at some point you'll want to update that. And that's another reason I like to not turn on any custom cache maps until some of the lower levels, like 15 or lower. The higher levels, 10 through 14, I like to have just a generic, just like street maps. That way I don't have to, I won't need to update those as often. So there are a couple of different thoughts. You've got, in one case, you may want a full replacement of your cache, every level, all of it. What you want to do first, I recommend making a backup copy of your tiles. And again, that's My Documents, GeoSync Go, cache, and then your cache folder, the name that you determine will be under that. I recommend making a copy of this just in case everything goes haywire and you have to bring it back. Because the next thing I would do after you got a copy is delete all the tile folders, these level folders, 11, in this case 11 through 20. Delete those. That's where all your tiles are actually stored. What you don't want to delete are these CSVs. Those are your grids. Actually, everything is based off of that. We can recreate the tiles as long as we have your grid files. So you want to definitely preserve those. They don't list your images or anything. It's just the grid area that you're working with. So at that point, once we've deleted the tiles, then you can go back and rebuild the tiles. Either way, either it's from GeoSync Go desktop or ArcGIS using GeoSync Go Tile Builder, or a combination of both, like I've mentioned earlier. If you want to update an area, say we only want to update a specific area of our map, say an area, let's zoom in here. We want to update this area, all right, from our, where'd it go? Oh, I turned everything off. Turn some mapping back on here. Utilities, link layers. Oh. Okay. Now, some of the options that you have for an area, you can go to Settings 1 tab and select Full Extent, create a custom. You can get the current, like save the settings. So then when I go back and run this, it will actually only create for that area that we specified. So we can specify the area on the map that we want to do the updates. So maybe I only need to update this little section. I can set that up, and then not only can I just do that area, I can even specify which levels. Typically, you want to do any levels that you've created with ARC. You'll want to do all of them, but you do have the options of, well, I want to do this area and this level. You set that up, hit run. If in this case if you're not doing an entire area, if it's not a huge area, you wouldn't really have to go back and delete the folder that we talked about here. You can actually turn on the override tiles, and that would allow it to override. You can use override tiles at any time. It's just if you've got like a huge area, a large number, it'll take a lot longer because it has to go out and delete each file before it replaces it and so on. So kind of a judgment call there. If it's a big area, I just recommend deleting the tile folders and letting it start from scratch. If it's a small area, don't worry about it. Just let the program delete the area, or delete the file. So that is about it. That was a little bit long, but hopefully you can utilize these tools. Look back at this video, and thank you very much for attending today.